A get-out-of-jail-free card is something that I thought was only gifted as a favor from Vito Corleone on the day of his daughter's wedding, or played rather inconveniently by your cousin Stuart during a family Monopoly game, but no. It also lives through a doctrine known as qualified immunity. And before we get into it, really quick, yes, there is a difference between qualified immunity and that was nice. And the immunity granted on CBS's Survivor. The one on the game show has nothing to do with protecting government officials, unless, of course, there's a government official actually playing on the game show. In that case, they would be eligible for that immunity. And that immunity, it's granted by Jeff Probst, a man who is incapable of wearing anything other than those shirts with 2 chest pockets, which, and you guessed it, makes that immunity phenomenally cooler. Qualified immunity stems from the Civil Rights Act, also known as the Ku Klux Klan Act, which was passed by Congress in 1871 as a way to combat the KKK and other white supremacist organizations. The law included a statute which allowed for citizens to sue public officials who violated their civil rights, which was excellent, like how a day at the pool with Eric McCormack from Will and Grace would be. But then, as if Eric McCormack were to call you before heading to the pool to say that a shirtless Steve Bannon just showed up at his house and was going to tag along, things got shitty. The Supreme Court has since made several decisions gutting this protection before ultimately inventing the Qualified Immunity Doctrine in 1967, which protects government officials from financial liability in cases when they acted in good faith in unclear legal situations. But it was in 1982 where the case of Harlow v. Fitzgerald helped reformulate qualified immunity to the modern interpretation, where it could only be withheld in cases which showed an explicit violation of clearly established statutory or constitutional rights. Not only does this make it extremely difficult to hold police accountable for their actions, but it means that the victims of brutality or harassment by law enforcement really get no relief in court. Now, that was a very long description, and if things are a little confusing, that's totally understandable. Let me simplify things by referring to a Julian Sanchez, who, if his credentials at the Libertarian Cato Institute and The Economist don't validate him, then surely his Twitter profile picture of him in a wool blazer in front of a loaded bookshelf does. He clarifies that with qualified immunity, the first person to litigate or take to court a specific harm is out of luck. Meaning that unless law enforcement have harmed someone in an almost identical way before, the case is dropped and they're awarded immunity. The specifications are extremely nitty-gritty. Just listen to Bloomberg Law's Kimberly Robinson detail a couple cases about police dogs.
The Supreme Court recently was considering taking up a case where an individual was bit by a police dog while they were sitting on the ground with their hands up. And the plaintiffs had offered up a previous case that found that an individual who was bit by a dog who was lying on the ground with his hands down had been subject to a constitutional violation. But the lower court said that wasn't close enough. There was enough of a distinction between the person sitting down with their hands up and the person laying down that the officer was entitled to qualified immunity.
Yeah, the difference between someone sitting and lying on the ground was enough to grant immunity, which is criminally particular. It's a type of particular that should only come when someone's pretentiously describing the difference between club soda and seltzer. You know what, Anna? Fuck you, they're both bubbly. There, I said it. Fuck you, they're both bubbly. That's just one example. But I hope it gives you an idea of how qualified immunity is a problem, and a problem that's becoming more prevalent. Reuters conducted a recent study on how often appellate courts granted qualified immunity to officers accused of using excessive force, which showed that not only is qualified immunity a common outcome, but it's getting much easier for police to have lawsuits thrown out because of it, even showing that there's an increased tendency for courts to grant immunity in these cases. From 2005 to 2007, 44% of cases ruled in favor of police, but then from 2017 to 2019, that number rose to 57%. Okay, so after hearing that, now is not the time for someone with good hair and a love for skydiving to step up and read from the tattoo on their forearm that says, rules are meant to be broken. That's a great mantra for movies like Ratatouille or anything starring Vin Diesel, but not now. Qualified immunity allows for the consistent breach of the Fourth Amendment. It insulates law enforcement from the consequences of violating the very law that they're there to enforce. You might say that an emperor penguin has an easier time holding a 35-pound dumbbell that's been coated in petroleum jelly than the legal system does holding police officers accountable for egregious actions. A few episodes ago, I pointed out that lawn chairs are the only things left on Earth that aren't a political issue. But a William Bode of University of Chicago Law School seems to have refuted my claim, saying that qualified immunity doesn't have to be a partisan issue. And as it is, it draws criticism from both sides, most notably from conservative Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas and liberal justices Sonia Sotomayor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Sotomayor and Ginsburg noting that qualified immunity tells officers that they can shoot first and think later, which when giving instruction to Michael Jordan or your beer pong partner named Blair is pretty solid advice, but not for law enforcement who are routinely asked to deal with situations way beyond their training, situations better handled by mental health and social work professionals. Everyone, here's my thing. There's a problem with police brutality. There's a problem with excessive force being used. To say that it would all go away if we abolished qualified immunity is simply false. There is much, much more that needs to be addressed in the way of systemic racism and police unions. But to start with tackling qualified immunity would be a great way to help legitimate change. No, it's not like Rogan, but like yes, it is a podcast, yeah.